Welcome. This is Measuring Up, sponsored by the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission, where we always talk about the future of public relations and, of course, measurement and evaluation. Today, I have Kim Ratcliff from Frazier Heiby, who's had a very interesting journey throughout her career that has takeaways and lessons not only from a career standpoint, but also from a measurement and evaluation standpoint. Kim, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mo.
So Kim, I think the first thing right off the bat would be great to share with our audience a little bit about your background and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to do so. I think perhaps a little bit unlike some of my peers in the PR, marketing and communication space, and in particular in the integrated comm space. I started off my career as an analyst and not as a communicator. So that was a little bit different. Actually majored in French, and the bulk of my undergrad was more so from the linguistics perspective. So I was working on measuring the learning process of non-native speakers of English. And my work study job was in a lab working for a linguist at Ohio State named Christiane Laufer. And I worked with cutting data basically and saving it on these giant disks back in the, well, it was the late 80s and early 90s, I guess, back in the day when storage was looked a little bit different than it does today. So started off from that perspective and graduated with that degree and remaining in a place where I wasn't going to be able to use my French or my linguistics. I stay here in Columbus, Ohio, because my husband's a little bit of a homebody. And I actually started working in a nonprofit doing their database management back in the days of DBase 3+, and also doing program evaluation. They had a number of federal and state grants, and so I did reporting for that. And that's what prompted me to continue in my studies, coming into grad school, getting my master in public administration, and then working at Ohio State in the Office of Institutional Research. I actually had a graduate assistantship there that morphed into a full-time position and helped to set up some of the early days of data sharing at Ohio State. This would have been in the mid-90s, where we put together an Association of American Universities data exchange. Like data storage, exchanging data at that time was not as easy as it is now. So putting together protocols for that and doing the university's reporting and peer-to-peer benchmarking back in the day. So that's how I started off. And about midway into my career, I began working with people a lot more. Of course, being an analyst, you are working with people, but I started doing some more research from a qualitative perspective, doing some focus group research. And in my career at Ohio Department of Education, after I had moved on from Ohio State, I began doing that process, doing more outward focused work. I was the manager for the state's data collection system. And we put together the first statewide student identifier, maintaining student anonymity, but doing it in a way so that we could look at longitudinal student progress. And so in that aim, I began looking into different ways of doing business, one of them being more so communicating and persuading folks to move from these legacy data collection systems into some new data collection systems that would give us the opportunity to bring data to a wider group of people from a reporting perspective. And from there, then I made the jump from public sector into private sector, working for PR and public affairs firms, and have been doing that since about the mid 2000s.
One of the parallels that I think is so interesting about the public and private world as it pertains to public relations is how similar the history of measurement is. If you take education as an example, education historically has been notorious for being an area where, benchmarking has been tough, KPIs have been tough, and, especially in the nonprofit side of things, there's been continuous dialogue in the ecosystem about how the sort of education practitioners can move towards a more measurable kind of approach as it pertains to the efficacy of what they do. And of course, public relations has sort of similar, has faced a similar challenge, especially over the past, 15 years as data and technology has, really brought a lot of change to the ecosystem. There's been a similar sort of scrutinization on KPIs and benchmarking and the measurability, if you will, of public relations. So it's so interesting that your sort of initial experience in the world of nonprofits and the education sector are so relevant to your role as a PR practitioner. And along those lines, Kim, I think one of the questions that occurs to me that I think our audience would be very interested in is about career paths. Clearly you've had a very unique one as it pertains to, the different things that led you to becoming a public relations and communications practitioner. Is there anything that you would say or recommend to, maybe some, young folks just coming out of their university education that are considering, a career in public relations or even measurement and evaluation, and how, there are different ways to pursue that? Any learning that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's a fascinating observation, and it is one that, sort of brings all of the pieces together. I think, as communicators, the thing that we are most focused on is, the audience, the human experience, right? And also, from a more analytical and a research perspective, that is also very critical. I see a lot of my students at Ohio State, and also, folks that are young coming up in our public relations firm at Frazier Heiby, as well as others that I network with. I see folks that are very cause-oriented and very focused on the people and the holistic human experience. And I think the thing that I would say the most is to lean into that more and ask curious questions about what that experience is, whether it's from the internal communications perspective or in this state right now where, from a pandemic perspective, internal communications, you can sort of ask yourself, what's the definition of internal? Since we're all working from home, we're building corporate and workplace cultures that are very different from the ones that we engage with when we're in person. And so I think it's all about asking why, asking how, more so than asking the who, what, and the when. I think it's the why and the how that we need to lean into more, especially for folks that are on the up and coming side from the communications perspective. And I think no matter where you are in your career, if you're always asking those questions and digging deeper, you're always going to be a service to, your client, to your agency or your organization, and to yourself at the same time. You can continue to be in that exploration mode, which is, what it's all about. That's how we bring value to our clients.
And Kim, when you look at your experience over the years at, Cochrane Group, Paul Worth and Associates, through your years at Battelle and of course now at Frazier Heiby, you've in a sense, uh, you've been in this field of public relations and communications during a period of time where there have been many, what I would consider to be substantial paradigm shifts
Mm-hmm.
about the discipline, about how to practice it, how to manage it, how to measure it, etc. What's your perspective on perhaps what's changed about public relations and communications the most over the years, and maybe some additional context based on your experience?
Yeah, I think it is very interesting. When I started my career, it was during the time of an economic downturn, and then out of my undergrad, and then when I came out, you know, after I got my graduate degree, things were looking up. But I will say that it's been interesting during this most recent, I guess, 7 or 8 months or so, just giving perspective to folks around the situation now versus during the Great Recession. And, it's funny because now that we use Slack, for example, or, we're chatting with people all the time, there's not a need to sort of batch our communications as we're getting ready to have meetings with people. For example, if we're getting ready to have meetings with a leader, we can ping them and we're all open to being pinged. But I do wonder sometimes from the interpersonal perspective, and I'm a big believer in the Kahneman approach and the look at, the difference between system 1 and system 2. And I think that I do believe that when we give folks more time to reflect and to prepare for our engagement with them, when it's person to person and when it's an interpersonal opportunity, whether it's like this or truly in person, I think that all of that pinging that we do now doesn't necessarily serve us well. And I realize I'm sounding like a little bit of an older person, maybe because I am, but I'm very interested in the intergenerational opportunities with our communication. I think that, there's a lot that we can bridge by virtue of having very immediate communications and being able to ask questions in the moment and getting that, instant satisfaction. But I do think we still need to carve out time for going deep, whether it's with our team members, with our leaders, or, with folks that we're mentoring and guiding through their career growth process. It is, again, more about carving out that time for dedicated and deep communication instead of just the quick hits. And I will say, I feel like the quick hits have been there for a long time. Now we're looking at, tweets as opposed to just scanning headlines, right? So in a way, a lot has changed, but in a way it hasn't too. It's moved to a different medium or a different way of giving us those little pings versus the more in-depth opportunities to be, strategic communicators.
I'm so glad you said that, Kim, because we kind of forget this as practitioners sometimes because, the tactics might change, the form factor of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis might change, but the constant really has always been that influencing people, building rapport, building engagement was hard then and it's hard now. The tactics surely have changed, but that remains a constant. So Kim, let's, taking that further a little bit, let's dig into your work at Frazier Heiby. And let's unpack it a little bit. One of the things that we spoke about before was your work with the energy space and utilities in particular. Tell us about some of the brand and reputational challenges in the energy and utility ecosystem, and how you and your team at Frazier Heiby work with your clients to navigate them.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that when we look at the space as a whole, it is all about relationship. It's the quality of the relationship that the utility has with their customer base. And it's also about the quality of that relationship that they have with their employees. And when we think about the utility space, really, the employees are the faces and the personalities that present, directly to the customer and are responsible for building those relationships. I think, one of the things that we've seen be a success for utility providers is, of course, JD Power scores are going to be huge from that perspective of, customer satisfaction, customer trust. And when we look at measurement from an internal perspective, we see things like, folks using the Gallup Q12, right? And those are things that are tried and true from that, employee experience perspective and the customer experience perspective. I think the magic really happens when you're able to put those pieces together and leverage the opportunities that you see coming from both. So, in the utility space, you and I have talked about this a little bit already, despite the fact that there are more options for people. Folks who are customers also know that, well, if I live in a certain area, I do, get my power from such and such a company, whoever that company may be, right? Not all utilities have the ability to, go out and engage directly with customers on a daily basis, but they do have things like, their Twitter accounts. They do have things like their linemen, if they're electrical utilities, and their customer service folks and people like linemen are the ones that know you as the utility. They're the ones that the customers engage the most directly with. I think, one of the most compelling things that we're seeing from the utility perspective is that trend of putting the focus on the employee relationship, or the channeling that employee personality, and linking that to the customer satisfaction. We've seen, you could look across, lots of different utility provider Twitter accounts and see the different ways that they are showcasing their employees from all walks, but linemen, because linemen and line workers in general, women as well, are out there engaging directly. Look at what just happened with, the Hurricane Laura. And every time, a natural disaster comes across and affects us, across different utility boundaries, utilities are known for banding together and going out and helping each other. And they send folks wherever the challenges are. And so I think, sharing that very openly and sharing the stories about the trip to wherever it is that they're going to help, and some of the things that they saw along the way. One thing that, is really interesting to me as well as the community service perspective. So many utilities give to their communities in a big way, whether it's from, the perspective of employees going out and volunteering, or it's, money being contributed. And I think those are things that that people notice in the community, and you can see those types of engagement and how they sort of, it's not a causal thing, but it is correlational, and making the link between that activity over time and building customer trust.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we can see is, starting to look at even publicly available data around different, for example, projects, different projects that utilities have planned, infrastructure improvements. We know that reliability has a big impact on customer satisfaction. So in the process of communicating with customers, if we know that, for example, reliability has been a challenge in the past for a particular area, and we know there's a project coming online where there are going to be improvements, but there may be some challenges along the way, and we've got a whole bunch of people working from home right now that don't appreciate those challenges in the midst of their business day with power going on and off. There are things that we can do to communicate directly with customers, to at least make them aware that things are going to be happening over time, and that I think at least giving that information and being candid about it is important.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at an article recently from a customer support perspective, and the writer was doing a scan. Let me pull her name here. It's Leslie O'Flanahan from ICMI, which is all about customer support, basically. And she was doing a scan on Twitter accounts across different electrical utilities and differentiating the approach, how, from her perspective, it's a benefit to say, hey, we are monitoring our Twitter between these hours, and being very candid about that. But also to say, instead of responding in the same way to customer concerns that are raised there very publicly,
Mm-hmm.
be a human and have a fresh and empathetic response that is different every time. Let your customer support folks, have a holding statement if there's information that you don't know, but let them be humans to support and respond to the human beings that are going through some frustration during, a power outage, or maybe, repeated outages. So having that show of empathy, I think, is really important. And instead of just having the blanket statement around an apology for an inconvenience, let it be communicated in a fresh and, and candid, honest, human way each time.
One of the aspects of utilities that I find so interesting, Kim, is the control over and the direct line of communication that utilities have with consumers.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think many other industries would probably envy, because they have such a direct sort of information exchange going on with their consumers and with their customers, not only about consumption, but what their preferences are, what different issues they're facing at the residential level, at the commercial level. It's a very direct line of engagement. And I think one of the broader trends that utilities have been increasingly talking about is the sort of entry of the large technology companies into the utility ecosystem. Think Google, Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera, and how this is increasingly a risk for utilities, because high-tech companies that are good at engaging customers, with cutting-edge technology and engaging, mobile applications and things like that, are entering this sort of utility ecosystem And it's, it's really a struggle, I think, for many utilities because they're being forced to think about their business in completely new ways. So my observation is that folks like you and firms like Frazier Heiby, utilities can benefit so much from, because now is the time to calibrate the initiatives that your brand has as a utility with respect to engaging consumers, employees, suppliers, and of course the major force of the regulatory ecosystem, which is very present in the utility ecosystem. So so it's a major, I think, shift happening in the utility ecosystem, and it's interesting to hear about the work that you and your firm are doing. Transitioning to the next topic, Kim, let's talk a little bit about what many would consider to be the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19. So whether it's your clients in the utility ecosystem or other areas, how are your clients navigating the COVID-19 situation, and in particular from a strategic communication standpoint, what have they done to really communicate their values and what they're doing to help not only their own customers but society in light of the challenges related to COVID-19?
Yeah. So I will say that yes, it has been a challenge for many of our clients. I probably safe to say for everybody out there right now. And at the same time, I think it has opened up new ways of thinking about how to best communicate. I'll go back to what you said around some of the perhaps unforeseen competition in the utility space, but also at the same time, we'll say that we're seeing utility companies using some of the new technology that really does get close to home. Things like Nextdoor, for example. Nextdoor is something that our utility clients, as well as some other clients, are starting to use as a way to, again, to your point, get closer to people even during this time of social distancing in a way that is safe. I think there was, from a utility perspective, there was just recently some data that was put up by eSource around COVID-19 response of different companies. And they actually did a survey, and they posted a spreadsheet across the different factors that they studied in the survey around COVID response and messaging and supports. And I think, one thing is it's the messaging, right? It's, how are you continuing to put out messaging that demonstrates empathy, and also the fact that, we're in this together for the long haul. Because once I think everybody realized that this wasn't going to be a short-term thing, the messaging started to change up a little bit. I think, the other piece is the different things that that our clients, even outside the utility industry, have been doing from a COVID perspective. To I'm thinking about one client in particular that is a manufacturing client that happens to be happen to be on the list of the governor's approved companies to continue operating. And so, because they're a technology company, their operators, their technicians, their engineers, everybody was continuing to come in all during the process this summer. They did not close. And they had friends, the people that were employees there, that worked at other manufacturing companies that did have shutdowns that were very, very much, in the media. We saw, local auto manufacturing plants, for example, did have, weeks when they were shut down. But in particular, this manufacturing client that I'm thinking of did go out of their way to publicize their PPE donations to the community. They went out of their way to make philanthropic contributions to the community as well, to local United Ways and also to Senior Service Center. So they were putting the focus on those folks that really needed support. And at the same time, they were very upfront with their employees to say, we know this is a tough time for you. And so they gave all of their employees above a certain level a bonus to use as it was helpful for them, knowing that people were having challenges with childcare, challenges with perhaps taking care of sick family members. And then also at the same time, they said, feel free to make a contribution to an organization in the community. And so, we're seeing those types of opportunities. We also saw opportunities even across the different clients we have at Frazier Heiby to say, hey, when we had one client in the senior living space that may have had a need and an opportunity for some PPE donations, to connect them up with another client that may have been able to provide those PPE. So I do think there's some innovation here. I think, there's another, we've had, several manufacturing companies in the Dayton area. One in particular that stands out for me, Tempogenics. It's a company that we've worked with through our connection with the Montgomery County Economic Development Organization. They ramped up their production to generate these, thermometers, basically, that are produced on, I think they're just produced on paper, and they received such demand during COVID because of the need to take a very quick temperature. They had demand from big box stores. They also had demand from, big organizations as well that needed their help. So we've seen the response across the board as it pertains to pivots in business, pivots in production, as well as different ways of operating. To continue to do a production process as a manufacturer during this phase and maintain social distancing between people on the shop floor takes a lot of innovation, and it takes a lot of discipline. And that's something that, we never could have foreseen. And so the challenge that has on employees from an internal communications perspective to make sure that everybody's kept up to speed and that everybody's spirits are kept up, but also from an external communications perspective, when you may be getting requests for media interviews, but needing to prioritize your time for the production priority. So it's a balancing act.
Sure. Another area that I think would be really fascinating to get your perspective on, Kim, would be the boutique agency perspective. As measurement has been the focus of this industry's, the PR industry's, sort of industry discourse for so many years. And there's a wide range of methodologies, frameworks, capabilities that have been developed throughout the ecosystem, that have now been adopted. Some by kind of independent groups like AMEC, the Barcelona Principles is one example, but others that are more proprietary at an agency by agency basis or an organization to organization basis. So what's it like to navigate the evolution of measurement in the PR ecosystem from the vantage point of a boutique agency? What kinds of questions are your clients asking you about the next wave of measurement innovation, and what role do you think boutique agencies can play in contributing to the future of measurement in this space?
Yeah, I love the measurement maturity model that AMEC has created. I will say that we've been very curious about that and have been looking at it, for ourselves, and also thinking about it from the perspective of, what we're able to deliver for our clients and what our clients are able to deliver internally. I think, even though people are being justifiably so cautious with budget right now, given COVID concerns, I do think there's a lot that we have done as an agency, and I think there's a lot that our clients can do right now during this time to sort of connect the dots from the measurement perspective. One of the things that we always challenge each other with is this mantra of, having a curious mind. And even before we come into a pitch meeting with a client, even before we go to, an initial kickoff meeting and are doing deeper discovery, we say, what did you find out today about the client that the client didn't tell you? How did you do your research about the client using even publicly available data? The picture behind me is the William Oxley Thompson Library at Ohio State. Ohio State is a land grant institution. And as a result of that, they have a variety of data in addition to, periodicals and books that are available for us to tap into. So, can we take a look at those databases and do an environmental scan, do a competitor analysis, look at an organization's SWOTs as a starting point, and again, even beyond what they have told us about themselves. So I think that's the thing that I would reinforce from the front end. Our Frazier Heiby Insights framework is really based on, giving that initial curious mind's view on the client situation and how we can help them to, better see themselves. I think, on the other end of things, there are, these big KPIs in the sky, right? I think we are, starting to build out dashboards for our clients that include data that push beyond those vanity metrics that, we all used to get sucked into in the past. Thank goodness no one's asking me for, ad equivalencies anymore. That was something that happened usually every day when I started working in PR. Thank goodness that's not happening anymore. And we have at our fingertips, challenge that we have right now is finding a way to present it in a dashboard so that, we are not overwhelmed by the data, and so that we and our clients find meaning in it. So whether it's looking at Google Analytics, whether it's looking at, data from whichever, e-newsletter platform you're using, all of the data that are available to us through, pick your flavor, TalkWalker, Cision, that we're awash in data. But I think the challenge right now for us as we provide that strategic counsel to our clients is how do we prioritize the data that matter? You know, one of the things that we're doing is we're big on message testing. We're big on message testing before we go big with any communications initiative. And we're also big on looking at the effectiveness of those messages as delivered by different spokespersons. So I could have a set of, you know, messages, call it, you know, if I'm doing some A/B testing, call it, you know, message set A that's delivered by spokesperson X and spokesperson Y. If those messages resonate so much more when delivered by spokesperson X, you better bet I'm going to lean into what she's able to do with those to take them further and get them additional reach for me. Mm-hmm. Now, what do I have to do with spokesperson Y to, you know, back up a little bit and say, okay, maybe those messages aren't ringing true from this person. Maybe I need to go back and ask my questions in a different way so that I can help to channel their story mm-hmm. in a way that resonates more deeply and also, you know, gets better reach. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I would say as it pertains to the data science, you know, that supports the big KPIs in the sky, we're working a lot with our partners in the community that go deep from that analytical perspective. But as it pertains to being strategic around asking the right questions and organizing the data for insights, mm-hmm. not just for mounds and mounds of data, those are the things that we're playing an active role in right now as a boutique agency, because a lot of us at Frazier Heiby have worked with big teams of analysts in the past, and so we know the right questions. I think as we, from our agency perspective, as we plan forward, we are looking to enhance our bench strength from an internal perspective around analytics and data science. But right now we're doing a lot partnering with folks that, you know, we trust in the community who are, you know, coming to the table with us to bring the data together and do, you know, the hard work of, you know, data cleansing and making sure that it is all organized in a way that is going to be meaningful for the clients from the display perspective.
Sure. Thanks, Kim, for that perspective. I think the boutique agency point of view has always been fascinating to me because what I find is that from a resources standpoint, they may not be able to juggle as many experiments, but boutique agencies, in my experience, for whatever reason, have kind of a finer understanding of what clients are increasingly demanding. It's interesting to me. Perhaps it's because at larger agencies there's so many layers of bureaucracy, and you know there's so many layers between the actual client and the practitioner that oftentimes things get lost in translation. But when you're so frequently getting that feedback directly from the client about what they want, how they want to see it, the precision with which they want to understand their engagement, it's a game changer. So thanks again for sharing that perspective. Kim, so as we wrap up, you know, and I ask everyone this question, but I have a feeling your answer is going to be particularly interesting. There's so much going on in this space. There's so much going on in the world. What are you most interested about, you know, moving forward as it pertains to the future of strategic communications and public relations?
That is a really good question. It's funny. I've been helping to organize a panel discussion that's coming up at the end of October on sort of the short name for it is the human and artificial intelligence experience, you know, putting both together for all the smarts. That's in a nutshell what the session is about. And I think, you know, as we leverage technology to help us with our productivity, sometimes now with our writing, to move the needle, how is it that we can bring unique human perspective into our communications offerings for our clients? How can we better channel our own human perspectives, but also those of our clients for their benefit, with pushing towards whatever purpose they have in place? I think the two things that really stand out for me are purpose, organizational purpose, personal purpose, and that unique human experience.
I really do think, Kim, that those two areas are going to play an increasingly big role for the future of the profession. Even if you just look at, the sheer quantity and frequency of communications campaigns that are focused on this topic of purpose, it's clear that this is a shift in the landscape, and it's going to play an increasingly big role for for the ecosystem moving forward. So thanks for sharing your perspective on that. This has been an incredible discussion, Kim. Thanks so much for sharing your perspective. I think the Institute for Public Relations community learned a ton about the parallels between the public sector and the private sector, especially your experience with education and how many parallels there are with the public relations world. I think some of our newcomers got some very tactical insights and takeaways about how they can think differently about a career in measurement and evaluation. And, what I found to be most interesting, I think we learned a lot about the boutique agency perspective. So thanks so much, Kim, for your participation.
Thanks, Mo. It's been a pleasure to just, wrap a little bit with you about the current situation. And I hope this gives back to the community.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Kim. And for our audience, we'll be back to you probably in about a week and a half with our next episode. So please tune in for that. Thanks again.